Back to Miller. Oh, my goodness.
Herbert.
Sidearm sling, and it's a touchdown.
Tyrese Maxey.
Oh, good spin move by Filipowski for the news. Give him 9.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Beef Up Front podcast here on Pick Swap Media. This is your host, Ryan Coyle, as always. Continuing on today with our NFC West preview. This will be part 3 and 4 of that preview, having already broken down the 49ers and Seahawks finishing in first and second. Today, we will be breaking down the Rams and the Cardinals, while finishing third and fourth, respectively. Neither of these teams making the playoffs. We'll get into the Cardinals a little bit later, but don't expect much of anything from them. I think I might be a little bit higher on the Rams than I should be. The more that I've kind of done research throughout the offseason, I'm starting to fade more on them, and I think it could be another season kind of looking like last year. But for time's sake, I have the Rams at 8-9, so a game below 500, 3-3 in the division. That's third in the NFC West and 10th in the NFC. For what it's worth, the 7th place team in the NFC I have is New Orleans Saints at 8-9. So the Rams are just missing it by some tiebreakers, a potential playoff spot. This was a team back in 2021. We saw them be Super Bowl champions. Last year was a disaster season, ton of injuries, and we kind of saw what the whole downside of the F them picks scenario or plan that Les Snead and Sean McVay had over the past few years, where it's all right, we're going to load up on a bunch of top-end talent, and we're not really going to have much after that. Depth-wise, we saw what happened when their depth kind of went out the window, and we saw them kind of bottom out last year. They went 5-12, third in the NFC West, missed the playoffs. Matthew Stafford missed significant time. Cooper Kupp, after his historic season in 2021, missed a bunch of games down the stretch as well. And we just never really saw this team get clicking. They got blown out by the Bills in their first game of the season. It just was a year to forget for this team. Matthew Stafford, will he ever return to the form that we saw him during that Super Bowl year? And remember, they did have a lot of things shake their way that Super Bowl year. In the NFC Championship game, Matthew Stafford had that play that probably would have been intercepted by 95% of the league, and the 49ers dropped it there at midfield. That would have ended the game most likely. And the 49ers kind of let that one slip away. The Rams were able to go down, score, win, and then go beat the Bengals in the Super Bowl. But this was just a Rams team that never really was able to get it going last year. They lost that season opener to the Bills. Then they do beat the Falcons and Cardinals back-to-back, who proved to be two of the lesser teams in the league last year, lose to the 49ers and the Cowboys. Find a way to beat the Panthers, but then they lose to the 49ers, Bucks, Cardinals, Saints, Chiefs, Seahawks. They lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in a row at one point, and kind of all things just spiraled out of control after that. So the Rams are certainly looking to turn the corner this year, get back into the playoffs. I think that's the goal for this team. I don't think anyone is having Super Bowl expectations for this bunch, but they still have a lot of top-end talent. They did unload some guys this whole season. I mean, last year Odell didn't play at all, but he was a big acquisition for them a few years back in the Super Bowl run. They traded away Jalen Ramsey this offseason. So we're going to be seeing a new-look Rams roster, but we'll start on the offense when previewing the entire roster. Matt Stafford's back at quarterback. It was one full year as a starting quarterback for the Rams. They went and won the Super Bowl. So as long as he's able to stay on the field and stay healthy, which this stage of a career coming off a major neck injury with what he had last year, that is a huge question. Is Matthew Stafford able to stay on the field and be out there? Because if he's out there along with a healthy Cooper Kupp and Sean McVay still dialing up plays, I think they're going to be able to put up some points. But that remains to be seen at this stage of his career. And I think it's also a major worry behind the offensive line. Rob Havenstein, Tremaine Crum Jr., Brian Allen, Steve Avila, Joe Noteboom. This is an offensive line that is porous, bottom 5 group most likely, bottom 5 unit in the league this year. And if those top guys get hurt, not much depth behind them. They're starting a rookie and Steve Avila, second-round pick at left guard. I'm not confident in this group. I think the entire offseason had to be working around kind of constructed, all right, we know our offensive line isn't going to be up to snub, up to par of some of these elite teams in the league. We're going to have to kind of work around that and figure out some creative ways. And I think that's one of the benefits of having Sean McVay in there. He's a guy that is capable of doing stuff like that. But will Matthew Stafford be able to stay upright? Because if not, you have Stetson Bennett behind him, and we've never seen him really outside of a game manager role with arguably the best college defense ever with Georgia back-to-back years, playing behind him and knowing he's got that to fall back on at the end of the day. So Matthew Stafford's health, especially behind this offensive line, remains to be seen. But if he's out there, offensive line can protect him. And Cooper Kupp, who has actually been battling a bit of a hamstring injury through training camp. But if those guys are out in the field, they should be able to sling it around a little bit. They got to keep Stafford upright and healthy at this stage of his career. He's been in the league for close to 15 years now, I believe. You look at their other receivers, Van Jefferson. He's had some nice moments in the league, but not a star guy that you can rely on. He's a nice number 2, but you'd ideally like to have him as that number 3 option, which he was when they won the Super Bowl with Odell. And then Ben Skoranek, he's had some moments too, but this group we're not getting overly excited about. Cooper Kupp, stud. When he's on the field, won the Triple Crown 2 years ago. Had one of the best receiver seasons we've ever seen in NFL history. But, I mean, behind him, there's a lot of room for question. I mean, I still am kind of buying into some of this top-end talent, but Kupp misses a game here or there. Stafford, we could see this team kind of spiral out of control and out of control quick. When you look at the backfield, Cam Akers, he's had a roller coaster career so far. Came in his rookie year, made some plays. Then he tore his Achilles, came back for the playoffs, actually, played in the Super Bowl. Last year, was in the doghouse, looked like he might get traded, released. Now he's back to being the starter. You have Kyron Williams, a guy from Notre Dame a few years ago, behind them as well. Cam Akers, when he's on the field, he's been pretty solid, but up and down. I'm just, you don't know what you're going to be getting out of this Rams offense this year. And I think Sean McVay might be there scratching his head, being like, you know what, this might be it. If I don't see it getting much better, especially with the lack of picks. I mean, trading out Jalen Ramsey, which we'll get on a little bit, they did recoup some draft picks. But I don't think this is going to be a playoff team. The more and more I've looked at this roster, got a lot of, to put it politely, no-name guys on this team. It could spiral out of control quickly. And without all the proper draft picks behind them, it's like, oh, God, like we're playing for kind of nothing. That's the dark side of the F them pick strategy that the Rams have had. So on offense, all going to come down to the health of Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp at the end of the day. They might be able to catch some people off guard, have a few big scoring weeks with the benefits of Sean McVay being your head coach and your play caller. But the offensive line, worried. Running game, worried. Outside of Stafford and Kupp, extremely worried. I'm not optimistic about this offense at all this season. We turn our attention to the defense now, where I think we can be a little bit more optimistic, but still saying there's much big-name talent on this side of the ball is not something that I'm going to be pumping my chest for either. You have still maybe the best defensive player in the game in Aaron Donald, one of the 10 best probably defensive players of all time. But he came in the league in 2014. He's a seasoned veteran now. Could be his last year of football as well. We've heard the rumors of retirement from him. And you look at across from him are up on the defensive line with him, Bobby Brown and Ernest Brown, 2 guys, younger players, not really that well established in the league. What are we getting out of these guys? Ernest Jones and Michael Hotch at our outside backers, and Ernest Jones, Byron Young, rookie, and Hotch at the other linebacker on the outside, and then Ernest Jones and Christian Roseboom on the inside. If you're not a diehard Rams fan, or if you're not a guy that's sitting there breaking down the all 22 every week, I like to consider myself a big football fan. I think I know most rosters kind of inside and out. Tell me if these guys' names are ringing a bell to you, really. I mean, Aaron Donald, stud. We know that. Great player. Well-established player, Hall of Fame, future Hall of Fame player, multiple-time Defensive Player of the Year. But if that's the only guy on your defense, especially up front, that's going to be, you could be counted on to make plays. What are we doing here? I mean, this could be terrible. The more I've gone through this team, finishing 8-9, that was extremely generous. I think it could be more down in this Cardinals neck of the woods and potentially competing for the worst record in the league this year. This is pretty bad. The safeties, we'll give it to him there. Jordan Fuller, John Johnson III, coming back from the Browns. That's a nice little safety duo. That's a nice little 1-2 punch. All right, we can deal with that. Kilo Witherspoon at corner, Darion Kendrick at corner, Kobe Durant at corner. You don't have Jalen Ramsey. You're not trotting him out there anymore. I mean, this is a group that is their top 3 players, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Donald. I wouldn't be surprised if that's 50% of their payroll right there. I mean, this team is going to struggle. And especially if some of these starters get hurt, wow, being for a very long year in Los Angeles, and it's crazy to think they're just 2 years removed now from a Super Bowl. But this defense is gonna, I think, really, really struggle. When you turn your attention to the coach, we give coach grades out. Sean McVay, I think we'll give him a B plus. I think he's up there in that top 5 to 6. He's got that Super Bowl now. Definitely a great offensive coach, but we saw kind of last year when shit hit the fan with this team, kind of put his head between his legs and it looks like felt bad for himself at times. And this was a team that really fell out of order and spiraled out of control. So let's see what he can do with a lesser talented team. I mean, I'm not comparing this group exactly to the Giants of last year, but the Giants last year going in, we said this is not a very talented team, but Brian Daboll did what he did. He worked with what he had, and he led that team to the playoffs, a playoff win as well. I think that Giants team, which I don't think was very talented, probably has more overall talent than this Rams team, but top-end talent, Rams still got a few dudes with Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, and Aaron Donald. They still got a few dudes. Last year on that Giants team, Saquon Barkley, and you didn't know what you were getting from him coming back from injury. He was really the only dude on that roster. So if Sean McVay wants to be considered an elite coach, or if he's okay, content with what he is, and he'll just transition going to TV next year, so be it. But if he wants to get back up into that elite ranks of the coach, I think he's got to learn how to do more with less. And with this roster, he certainly has less. So huge pressure on him this year. Breakout player for this team. A lot of unproven guys have a chance to be a breakout guy, have a chance to make some names for themselves. We'll go with Van Jefferson. He's been in the league for this is going into, I believe, his 4th year now, but he's a guy that has been, an established kind of number 3 receiver, number 3 option. He has a real chance to step up outside of Cooper Kupp this year. Is going to be seeing a shit ton of double, triple coverage this year. Van Jefferson, the targets are going to be there for him. So a big opportunity for him to step up. Let's see if he can really claim that role and earn himself another contract here in LA. And then 2 games to watch for this Rams team this year. Let's pull up their schedule. I mean, kind of a doozy with what I'm expecting from them. I do have them going 8-9, and I kind of want to walk that back a little bit. But week 3, they do go Monday Night Football at the Cincinnati Bengals, rematch of the Super Bowl from 2 years ago. That's going to be, just a kind of a fun watch. Seeing Stafford hopefully healthy and Burrow going at it. And then we'll also go with, if all things shake right, we'll go week 17 at the Giants. I do think the Giants are going to be in this mix of that 8-9, 9-8-ish range, competing for a wild card spot. And then I have the Rams. I do have them finishing 8-9. So if they are able to potentially sneak out that Giants game there, maybe that's the win that gets them in. But as we talked about throughout, I think I was a little bit too bullish on them at the beginning and kind of walked back some of those comments about potentially 8-9. I see this team more like a 4-win, 4-13 type team. So don't expect much out there in LA, but you got a lot of other things. Convert yourself to a Chargers fan and go root for Justin Herbert some more. So, all right, that'll do it for part 3 of the NFC West preview. Stay tuned to the second part of this video. For part 4, we'll be breaking down the worst team in the year this league, or the worst team in the league this year, the Arizona. All right, now let's dive into part 2 of this episode, part 4 of the NFC West. And that's where we will be breaking down the Arizona Cardinals. I'm sure everyone tuned in is excited to hear this breakdown because I have this team finishing, let me just double check. Yep, an NFL worst 3-14 overall this year, 1-5 in the division, finishing last in the NFL, earning that number 1 pick, and dependent on what the Houston Texans do this year from their draft night trade for Will Anderson, the Texans could potentially be picking, Cardinals could potentially be picking this year 1-2. So you'd have to think if they do finish this poorly, regardless if Kyler Murray comes back and plays from that ACL injury or not, this is a team that most likely is going to be having Caleb Williams on their roster next year if they fall to the bottom like I'm projecting them to and like many. And I think 3-14 might actually even be a little bit generous for this bunch. When you look at the Cardinals from last year, let's not forget the year before 2021, they were one of the best teams in the league. I think they were 10-1 at one point. They wound up finishing 11-6, get absolutely rolled by the Rams in the playoffs. then they come back next year like, all right, well, we were building, we got to the playoffs, young quarterback, his first start, blah, blah, blah. Kyler Murray bitching about his contract, threatened to hold out. Everything in between. Last year, shit hits the fan even more for this Cardinals team. 4-13 overall, fourth in the NFC West. Cliff Kingsbury fired. Jonathan Gannon brought in head coach. Dude's a clown. Doesn't look like it's going to be much better with him. Kyler Murray tears his ACL down the stretch last year. I mean, this was a team that lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games in a row to end the season. They started out 2-2. The third game of the year, lost to the Rams. I mean, after that loss to the Rams, you kind of saw what potentially was coming for this team. I mean, then they go beat the Panthers, but then they lose to the Eagles. They lose to the Seahawks. They beat the Saints, lose to the Vikings, lose to the Seahawks again, beat the Rams, and then they finish the year on that 7-game losing streak. So this is a team has no momentum whatsoever. The quarterback not back with Kyler Murray. He's recovering from the ACL. I'm not expecting him to play at all this year. I forget exactly which week he tore that ACL in last year, but it doesn't make sense to rush him back. First off, if you're bottoming out and he's ready to come back and you're already 0-13, what's the benefit of putting him in there? He could potentially go win you a game or two, and then you're out of the position potentially for the number 1 pick, number 2 pick. Who knows? At that rate, you're just hurting your draft spot if Kyler does come back and find a way to go play his backyard football and win you a game. Or you rush him out there and he gets hurt again. And then he has no trade value in case you do get the number 1 pick. And then you're stuck with him on your roster. And unquestioned if you're going to be able to take Caleb Williams just because of what you're already paying Kyler Murray. That decision to pay him before last year, I think it's just going to come back to haunt this team over the course of the next year, because I'm not sure really how many people are going to want it. I mean, you look around the league, there could be some teams, maybe the Titans, depending on what they see in Will Levis or Malik Willis, maybe like the Vikings, depending on what Kirk Cousins does this year. The Giants, maybe, depending on Daniel Jones. I'm just thinking of a few teams off the top of my head. But I think they're in a rough spot there at the quarterback spot. In last year, ending the year 4-13, resulted in Kingsbury being fired. A new GM was brought in, new head coach, and Jonathan Gannon, who, all jokes aside about him, I mean, they did have the number 1 defense. They did go all the way to the Super Bowl, but we saw what happened when he played legit teams. I mean, no beating around the bush around on this one. The Eagles did play a really soft schedule last year, and then we saw what happened in the Super Bowl when you played Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Given they do that to a lot of teams, but still, they went out there and put up 38 points on the Eagles. And there's a lot of stuff where it was more so just the talent on the Eagles roster and less about what Jonathan Gannon was bringing to the table with that Cardinals team. But we transition our focus to this year, and it appears this team has one goal and one clear goal ahead of them, and that is to lose. That's really what it looks like. And it's hard to say that in the NFL. I don't think they'll go 0-17, but I do have them going 3-14. Would it surprise me if they went 0-17? No. Do I think it'll happen? No. I think 3-14, 1-5 in the division. I got them going 3-9 in the conference. NFL players, at the end of the day, they're playing for their job. They're playing for their money, their livelihood. They are going to want to go out there and play hard, regardless of if the team is setting them up to fail or not. They want to go out there and do their best to succeed. Jonathan Gannon, who knows if he has a handshake agreement behind the scenes with the GM and the coach, regardless if you go 0-17 or not, you'll be here next year. I feel like that has to be some of the parameters behind the scenes there, because looking at this roster, there's no way you can think they're ready to compete. Colt McCoy all offseason was the reported starter. A few days before cutdown day, they release him. They trade for Joshua Dobbs. They have 2 current quarterbacks on the roster. Joshua Dobbs, who's been tossed around as a backup quarterback, Jaguars, Steelers, Browns, now Cardinals, Titans last year too. And then Clayton Tune, rookie quarterback out of Houston. I mean, you start and end with the quarterback with every NFL roster. That is by far the worst quarterback room. Only can go up from there, you would think, potentially. I mean, James Conner, a solid running back. He's almost, if not 30 years old. Keontae Ingram last year had some nice moments. But, I mean, James Conner, not an explosive playmaker. He's a nice complementary piece to a backfield, I think. Maybe he was a good starter last year, the year before. But he's not, especially with a lack of a passing game. They're going to be able to stack boxes. We're not seeing much out of James Conner, I think, this year. Tight end, Zach Ertz. If he comes back, he's coming back from an ACL. He's good old reliable. He'll be a nice target security blanket. He might see 115 targets, but at this stage of his career, that's not what Zach Ertz is. He's more of a complementary piece, like a third or fourth option in a passing game, or the second option potentially for a team down the line, and at the trade deadline, maybe bring him back, like the Philadelphia Eagles. Who knows? Dallas Goedert and him back running together. But Trey McBride flashed him as a rookie at the tight end spot there last year. But the receivers, we'll give them that. They could be worse. Marquise Hollywood Brown made some plays last year, but that was with Kyler in the fold. Rondale Moore, an explosive player, has had his moments. Zach Pascal has had a few moments in the league. Greg Dortch has had a few moments in the league. Receivers, not the worst. They did release Hopkins. They did get rid of him. Another indication of kind of what the plans are, I think, for this team this year. But got some young guys who are out to prove themselves. Hollywood Brown in a contract year. Let's see if he can go prove that he can be a long-term piece for the Cardinals. Rondale Moore, as we touched on, has had some moments. He's got to stay healthy. Greg Dortch played pretty well at times last year. And Pascal, he's just a solid veteran receiver. He's a very good blocker as well. Not much to write home offensive weapons-wise with this Cardinals team. You go to the offensive line, traded back in the draft, and then they traded back up to get this guy, Paris Johnson. They're looking to him to be like the franchise tackle. They got him at the right tackle. DJ Humphries, pretty solid left tackle. The interior of the line, some misfits, I guess you could say, or retread type guys. Elijah Wilkinson, Froholt at center, Will Hernandez at guard. It's a group that's kind of guys just like, all right, well, this is the best we can do, kind of forming this part. Tackles, though, pretty encouraging. I like it. But when you're starting quarterback, most likely, no offense to you, Josh Dobbs, it's going to be him. That's the worst starting quarterback in the league. Of Clayton Tune, which I assume at some point will get some run. It's not a very encouraging group, and I don't expect Kyler Murray to be back till at least the second half of the season, I would think. And at that rate, if the Cardinals are 1-7, 0-8, I don't expect them to rush him back and play him at all. So offense, let's not get our hopes up. Go to defense now, which is what's supposed to be the strength of Mr. Jonathan Gannon. LJ Collier at defensive end. You got Leke Fotu at nose tackle. Jonathan Ledbetter at defensive tackle. Not really too familiar with his game. LJ Collier has made some plays with the Seahawks. He's here with the Cardinals now, and Fotu in the middle. He's a pretty solid defensive tackle. Zaven Collins, they're counting on him this year. Former first-round pick 2 years ago. They need him to step up. Traded away Isaiah Simmons. It's going to give Zaven Collins a bigger role. Simmons was never able to really live up to the potential and the hype that he had coming out of the draft. I think there's a lot of pressure on Zaven Collins this year, who's had some really nice moments, but he also has some room to grow and has had some struggles as well. Kaiser White comes over from Philadelphia. He was a really solid linebacker, but he's just a good role player. He's probably on the Eagles starting defense, their 10th best defensive player. I do really like B.J. Ojulari, the pass rusher that they got in the second round this year, I believe at LSU. He's a guy that I think could come in and make a nice impact from day one. Marco Wilson at cornerback. And then it looks like they're going to be starting a 6th-round rookie potentially in Trell Clark. Opposite of him, that corner duo, certainly not a strength. Trying to kind of mince words here. Antonio Hamilton's been a guy that's been passed around a little bit. Kayvon Wallace was just claimed. I think he could play a role for this team under Jonathan Gannon. Budda Baker, he's the glue that's going to hold this team together as a whole, not just the defense, but the entire organization. And he's a guy, too, I could see if things are struggling for this Cardinals team, potentially requesting out or them moving him for another draft pick, as it seems like that they've been willing to do throughout this offseason. So not a very encouraging roster from top to bottom, offense and defense. Coach grade Jonathan Gannon, going to give him a C-. He's got to prove to me that he can be an NFL head coach. But at the same time, I don't really think you can judge that much based off this roster. But I do think he's kind of got that handshake agreement potentially behind the scenes where things have to get better on the roster before you can really evaluate my performance. My breakout player, I'm going to go with B.J. Ojulari. This defense needs some guys to step up, especially in the pass rush. If he's a guy that finds his way to 6 or 7 sacks and he was your second-round pick, I think that would be a really strong year. And then 2 games to watch for this Cardinals team. We'll go week 1 against Washington. I have Washington really struggling this year too. If you listen to that episode, I'm really low on them. I actually have them going 3-14. Potentially the battle for the number 1 pick or the tiebreaker for the number 1 pick in that game, but also a game I think that the Cardinals could find a way to win. And then we'll go with, what's another one? We'll go week 11. They play the Texans. I think that's another possible winning game. We haven't gotten to my AFC South episode yet where I break down the Texans, but I'm a little bit higher on them. But that those two are going to be kind of tied together in the draft. If the Texans bottom out, these two teams could be picking in the top 5, and the Cardinals have that Texans pick this year. So not overly optimistic, as you could tell, about this Cardinals team, but that's what they play the games for. That's why you got to, you roll out the ball and go see what happens. But low on this Cardinals team, worst record in the league at 3-14, bottoming out, and potentially some house cleaning, maybe even after 1 year with the head coach and GM, quarterback potentially out as well. It all remains to be seen. But as always, everyone, thank you for tuning in. That was the NFC West part 2 of our breakdown for that episode. Make sure to go check out all the rest of the NFC, and we'll be moving into the AFC next. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will talk soon.